Welcome to the Everything Made Beautiful podcast with Shannon Scott, where we explore how God's faithfulness meets us in every season of life. This podcast is sponsored by Kava, the streaming app designed to close the gap between Sundays by providing transformational content that deepens your personal discipleship journey. Whether you're seeking inspiring messages, guided reflections, or practical resources, Kava meets you where you are and helps you take the next step in following Jesus. Search Kava, Q-A-V-A, download the app, and discover tools to grow in faith every day of the week. If you've been encouraged by Everything Made Beautiful, we'd love for you to share the love. Take a moment to like, download, rate, and subscribe wherever you're listening. Your support helps us so much. And now, on with the show.
Well, hey, welcome to the show, everyone. I can't believe this is the last Monday of February. Where is time going? Goodness. But today I'm thrilled to sit down with a truly inspiring voice and my new friend, Krystal Ribble. Krystal is an accomplished author, producer, and CEO of Told You So Media, where she serves as voice talent and writer across multiple podcasts, including Deposit Your Doubt, which explores questions of faith. As a 3-time author and recipient of an Independent Publisher Association Award for the Best Gift Book, her works, The Church's Orphans, Dwell, and Love Me in the Waiting, breathe new life into biblical narratives, inviting readers to see how these timeless stories speak powerfully to modern life. Her weekly writing and production work has been featured on TBN's Better Together show, reaching audiences worldwide 5 days a week, and is currently showcased on the Esther Press blog. Through Told You So Media, she also lends her voice and storytelling skills to various industries and corporations, highlighting the inspiring narratives unfolding within their organizations. With a Master of Arts in Christian Leadership from Liberty Baptist Theological Seminary and Graduate School, Krystal brings both academic insight and practical wisdom to her work. She resides just outside of Nashville in Brentwood, Tennessee, with her husband, Jared, and their 5 boys. Krystal and I met as we were preparing for the Esther Press Conference last year, and I quickly knew she had so much to share and to offer us. So get ready to be encouraged and inspired as we uncover how embracing the waiting seasons can transform our faith and lead us to a deeper, more resilient trust in God. So without further ado, my conversation with my friend, Krystal Ribble. Well, hello, Krystal. Thank you for doing this interview and for being on the Everything Made Beautiful podcast. I'm so glad we're getting to do this.
Thank you for having me, Shannon.
It's going to be so good. I'm holding up your book so that people who are watching us on YouTube can see what they're looking for, because they're going to want it after this conversation. This is Krystal's book. It's called Love Me in the Waiting. And I want you to hear this tagline because this is so good. Trusting God's purpose when you're longing for what's next. So Krystal and I, Krystal, I've already done your fancy bio on the intro, but you and I met because we were both asked to help with an event for Esther Press, which is David C. Cook's women's imprint. And then you did not get to do what we thought was going to happen with that event because, surprise, another baby was coming into the world. So, but I feel like we were kindreds in the first meeting we got to have about that event. And so I've so enjoyed getting to read your book, read your stuff, and I can't wait to have this conversation. But before we jump into the book content, tell us about your sweet family, because and tell us about that specific season of that sweet most recent baby, because that was an interesting text to get from you. And I know you were as stunned as we all were. So talk to us about your sweet family.
So my husband and I live in Brentwood, Tennessee, and we have 5 boys. So that was the 5th boy that was being born when that situation was happening. And we were supposed to do an event April, 12 and 13. Yeah. And then I discover after we planned that I was due April 17. And then the baby was going to come a month early. So I'm like, oh, this is fine. I'll have the baby and then I'll be fine.
Mm-hmm.
But, as life goes, he was in the NICU for a long time because he was so early. And, I showed up at the event, but I feel like I was quite a um, zombie version of myself. So,
No, I was actually amazed at how well you were doing and how good
oh,
you
that's
looked
sweet.
because after I had all three of my babies, people did not see me for a little bit because I did not wear the post pregnancy well. But you looked radiant as
Well,
always.
sweet.
But tell us just about you and your husband, what you've done in ministry. I've said a little bit of it, but just your heart for ministry and how you guys have gotten to where you are. And then we'll dive into the book.
Yeah. So, my husband was a professional drummer for well over 20 years in the Christian music world. And got to travel with him for quite a bit of that time as a tour manager. So, we spent a lot of time in the Christian music circles at that time, traveling. And then I've always been a writer. So, I was always writing in some facet. And I took a job as a college minister at a church here in Nashville, and he got to partner with me in that ministry, which was
Mm.
really awesome.
Yeah,
So
so
I
sweet.
got to really flesh out a lot of the curriculum type of things that I wanted to write and the Bible studies. And so I started doing that, and he partnered with me in that ministry. And we just had this massive heart for like not only the younger generations, like claiming their faith and stepping
Mm.
into that, but then also what that continues to look like moving forward. And so as we became parents, that began to evolve in me, and I had more things that God was birthing inside of me, not just the children, but also messages. So
Yeah.
it's kind of been a beautiful thing to kind of see happen.
Yeah, it's so sweet. And this is not your only book, but
It's
this
not.
book specifically and this topic specifically,
Mm,
I I mean, you and I both have spent lots of time with lots of women and lots of people, and
yes.
seasons of waiting are some of the most profound times when you go, is everything I believe true?
Yes.
Is everything I've been told true? Is all this stuff that all these Bible verses I quote, are those true?
Yes.
Because waiting is so hard. And we are a culture who has organized our lives so we don't have to wait. Like everything
Yeah.
we do is instant access, instant
True.
gratification. When something is even sluggish, we're immediately impatient. And so seasons of waiting spiritually, woo, those are difficult. So what made you go, I want to write this book and I want to talk about this? Because I know you well enough to know that you, like me, do not write out of something you've not experienced.
Yeah.
So, what led you to write this?
It started with, so my husband and I, we adopted our first child. And prior to that, we lost three adoptions before we were able to
Mm,
bring him home. And each of those have their own story of loss and just how deep and long that time was. Um, but I started realizing as I was watching everyone around me have children, and biologically, you're doing this and you have this 9 month
mm,
trajectory, right? It's
mhm,
like you can see the changes in your body happening. Like you prepare your home, you prepare this nursery, and all of those things. My journey to becoming a mom was much longer than 9 months, much, much longer. My body wasn't changing, my heart
mm,
changed, but I didn't have these physical signs of what was happening. And even in our home, the signs weren't the same. I didn't have a baby shower because we were
mm,
adopting kids that were older. And so there wasn't like these milestones that you usually give to someone that's going to bring a child into the world. But just like someone who's having a baby for the first time, I had nothing in my home to bring home a child.
yeah,
Like the first little girl that we were going to adopt, she was 7. I had nothing for a 7-year old. So I started realizing, wow, I don't really know how to tell people to show up for me and
yeah,
to love me during this time because this is so weird and
yeah.
it's just different than everyone else's timeline. And I actually don't know when the end of it is. And I don't
Yeah,
even know
I don't have a due date.
no, there is no due date. And even the dates they give you, all of that moves, all of it changes. For us, we lost 3 separate adoptions.
Mm,
And so it's like every dream you have, all the timelines you have, all of this stuff, it doesn't come to fruition. So during that time is really when this message started being birthed in me. Like, how do I explain to other people how to love me when I'm waiting? So
That's good.
that's where it started. But then over time, I started realizing, okay, there's a lot of different types of waiting in our lives. Oftentimes we are waiting to hear the Lord in a particular way. We have prayed for something that he's not answering, or he's going to answer it but not the way that you've prayed for it. And that has ended up being like the theme of mine and my husband's life. We have everything we have ever prayed for, but it did not come to us the way we prayed for it.
Ooh, say that
And
one more time.
we have everything that we have ever prayed for, but it did not come to us the way we prayed for it.
Mm.
Every single thing, like being a mom, that did not come to me the way I prayed for it. Didn't happen how I thought. My husband didn't come to me the way that I thought. Like everything in our life is that way. And so that message just developed. It was like once God got me to see that, okay, waiting seasons are hard, and I've suspended you in one where there is no end. I'm not going to tell you when the end is. Now you can start to see this in a lot of different ways. You can see this for a lot of different people in a lot of different seasons of life. So that's kind of how it all came to be.
Yeah. Ooh, that's that's good. I'm glad I have my pen because I printed out. I always print out all the quotes that I want to talk about because if I
Yeah.
read them from the actual book, I'll have to wear glasses.
Yeah.
But I print them in bigger font. I'm glad I have my pen so that I can write down what you just said. But I think when we talk about waiting, I'll say specifically about like adoption.
Yeah.
Not a lot of people take into account when someone is adopting that, unlike I feel the baby kick, or
Yeah.
things are being bought off my registry, or I know that come X season of the year, we're going to have a new little life with us and everything's going to
Yes.
change. Though those not only are not a guarantee, but more often there is a lot more no before there is yes. And
Yes.
so just considering that as we have friends and loved
Mm-hmm.
ones we know who are in a process of adoption, as beautiful and exciting as the process of adoption is, the realities of false starts, stops and starts,
Yeah.
losing adoptions, and the grief associated with that, like that is a lot of emotion
Yes.
to carry and manage the tension of and swing into and out of.
Yes.
So I'm glad that you put some language around that for people, because for those of us who've not
Mm-hmm.
adopted, I mean, I know so many people who've adopted, but we haven't quite had that level of conversation about it.
Yeah.
So that's just good for me to make note of. I, if it's okay, I got 5 or 6 quotes that I would
Yeah.
love to just talk about from your book. My
Yeah.
dog is over here whining, in case you're wondering what the sounds are. But that I got from your book that I'd love for you to just talk through. You write about how waiting is not a passive experience, which we might be
Yeah.
tempted to think that it is, but it's filled with purpose. And you said, God will never waste a minute of your waiting. That seasons are designed to draw us closer to Him and teach us valuable lessons that we may not fully grasp at the moment, but that we'll understand in hindsight. So just talk a
Mm-hmm.
little bit about not 1 minute of waiting being wasted, which I 100% agree with. Nothing is wasted in the economy of God, but talk a little
Yeah.
bit about what that looks like when we're living it out.
I think so much of this topic is about shifting your perspective of what that time is doing. Because oftentimes, if we are waiting on God to do something, waiting for something we've prayed for, waiting to move into a new season, whatever it is, um, we can think of this time as taking something from us instead of giving to us. And so the first thing I think that we have to do is just shift our perspective on it. And if you can do that, then you can start looking for what is it that God must be doing right now. Now, I can say, I understand, like everyone does, hindsight is 2020. You get to the end of something and then you can oftentimes look back and you're like, okay, that makes sense to me. And I think in the economy of God that sometimes you look back and you fully understand what he did, most of the time we probably don't. We see like a little gem of it, but earth side, we may never understand fully what was going on because we don't have the whole picture. He does. And so if you're able to, during the time that you're waiting for something, if you are able to start shifting it to, okay, God's doing something right now. I may not know what it is. I may not be able to see what it is, but I know that there will be purpose in every moment of this that's leading me somewhere he wants me to go. And that's the thing, is like he's leading you somewhere he wants you to go. This is not just pointless. He didn't just take you through this because he's like, this is an experiment. Let's see how Shannon will react. No, he already
Yeah,
knows.
I mean, he already knows it's probably not going to be great.
Yeah, he already knows how it's going to go and how you're going to react and what you're going to feel. So this is not an experiment. He's taking you somewhere on purpose. And I think we have to shift our perspective to understand that.
Yeah, so much of it can feel wasted. There is great hope and encouragement in knowing, even if it doesn't feel it, knowing that it is not wasted. One of the things I love about the book is that you pair each chapter with a biblical character's story, which I think is so important because we know there are things in scripture for us to learn from, obviously, but there are so many examples of all the kinds of waiting that we experience already for us in scripture and lessons we can take from that. And you said about it's people like Noah and Moses and Job, who all went through waiting periods, but you say we have more in common with our spiritual ancestors than we realize. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, my MO, if that's how you would say it, is when I am looking for something from the Lord, I always go back to scripture and I'm like, what
Yes.
did you do then? Because it is not that far off from what you're doing now. And so I want you to show this to me in a fresh way. And a lot of times people think going all the way back to Noah or all the way back to Moses, that's really far and it is not applicable to what is going on today. But it really is. It really, really is. And so, like, if you take Noah as an example, one of the things that God showed me in his story was the preservation that he gives us over our waiting seasons. And if you really go back and you read that story, you see that through all of the preparation, all of the things that he wanted Noah to do, the biggest thing that he was doing, because he preferred Noah, was that he was preserving him for the future. He wanted who Noah was to come out on the other side of that storm. And so sometimes God will take us through a season of waiting, or he will suspend us in time. And I think that's often what's hard for us as humans. Like if we feel like we're waiting and we're kind of suspended, we see everyone else, like their life going on around us.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And you think, oh, I'm behind and I'm not ever going to get there. Or God's answered that prayer for them, but he's not doing it for me. Like that's our human perspective of things. But if you think about Noah's situation, it's like, okay, God was going to suspend him inside of this ark because he preserved who Noah was, because he needed Noah on the other side of that storm. He needed who he was. Sometimes God's protecting you because he needs who you are on the other side of this. And so sometimes the purpose of that is that he's preserving you for a future. And again, that's shifting your perspective to be able to see it that way, to know he's saving me, actually. I often say Noah did not wish that he was outside of the boat.
Yeah.
Like he didn't. And if you think about your circumstances that way, I would much rather be waiting with the Lord than somewhere without him, somewhere without his presence, without his purpose in my life. I'd rather be with him. And that's the middle of the storm, that's where I want to be.
Yeah. Reminds me of Moses saying, wait, hold on just a second. If you're not going with us, we don't want to go wherever that is. We want to be where you are, basically. I think sometimes that's such a profound insight because I think sometimes we go, oh, I'm in a season of waiting, so there must be something about me that isn't measuring up or something that God needs me to be better at or more mature in. And all those things can be at play, but we rarely take the positive spin of it, which is God is preserving me because of who he needs me to be. on the other side of whatever this thing is that I'm waiting in or waiting to pass or waiting to go around.
Yeah.
And so that's a that's a really
Yeah.
good insight. And I think we always assume it's deficiency in us versus
Yes.
preservation by God.
Yeah.
Um,
And sometimes it is the pruning. Like sometimes
yeah,
he is
yes,
pruning something and he is needing something to change in your circumstances, your life, whatever it is. But I do think that if we start looking at things as what is this doing to actually save us? And what is this doing to keep who we are, to come out on the other side of this? It really changes. It changes how well you can navigate this season.
yeah, and how well we wait.
Mhm.
And the comparison trap is real. Looking at
Yes,
everybody else supposedly progressing or being successful or moving forward, and it feels like we're circling the same cul-de-sac
absolutely.
over and over and over. But preservation, man, that is good.
Mm.
A recurring theme throughout the book is that waiting can foster a deeper trust in God, and that
Mhm.
seasons of waiting, most often we come out on the other side with such a deeper and more intimate experience
Mhm.
of God than we had before. You said faith grows, our prayer life deepens, and trust in God becomes more than just a phrase we give a thumbs up to. So I'd love
Mm.
for you to talk about
Mm.
that and just even where that phraseology came from, because I was like, oh, yeah, I resonate with that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think sometimes in our Christianese, we can throw around like, trust God, you just
Yeah.
trust Him and everything's fine and all this kind of stuff. And that is not the reality for most of us. Like, if we're being honest,
When I hear people say things like that, I think, oh, there's someone who hasn't been through
Mhm.
anything.
Right, right. Yes. Yeah. I mean, honestly, because like you said at the beginning, talking about how like a lot of this can shake your foundation to in my opinion, so many times when we go through these things, and this has been the case with me, that you start questioning who
Hmm.
God is, you start questioning what he told you. Like, did I really hear your voice? Was that really a promise for me? Maybe you've changed your mind about
Yeah.
me and stuff like
Yeah.
that. And so it starts to really shake the foundation of trust. And it's not just trust God and everything's going to be rosy and everything's going to be fine. In my life, because I have a relationship with the Lord, when something is hard, then I go to prayer. I start asking him what's going on. What do you need from me? What am I needing to see? And I often will say, like, God is a big boy. He can handle my fears. He can handle my true emotions about something. And, spoiler alert, you're not hiding it from him. He already knows what you're thinking. But in working that out and in speaking to him about it, I am cultivating more and more intimacy with him.
Mm.
I am going deeper with him so that I can learn his heart more, so that I know how to trust him more in those circumstances. I often equate this to my relationship with my husband. I know my husband's voice better than I know anyone's voice
Hmm.
because I have spent countless hours talking to him, telling him things that maybe he didn't even want to hear. But I talk to him and he
Hmm.
talks back to me. And so we are we continue to work on the intimacy and how well we know each other because of how many hours we've spent talking to each other. It is the
So good.
same with the Lord.
Hmm.
And so when things are hard, if you run to him and you are talking to him, and if we look at those ancestors of our faith, that's what they did. They were in communication with him. Sometimes they had a line that no one else did.
Hmm.
Obviously, Noah heard something from him that no one else heard
Yeah.
about this ark.
Hmm.
And it's just this intimacy and this level that you don't really get anywhere else, but it often grows so much deeper through hard times and through things that you don't understand.
Hmm. I love that you said, newsflash, God already knows it. It's not like we're hiding it from him.
Yeah.
But I don't know if this is true of you because I don't remember enough about how you grew up necessarily. But
Yeah.
I definitely, as a people pleaser who had a big dose of legalism in my formative
Mm,
years and was taught about, big, authoritative, powerful
Yes.
God, but not so much about intimate,
Hmm.
kind, loving, wants a relationship with me God. I definitely have succumbed for much of my life to, I have to get all cleaned up and get my
Yeah.
head right and get my attitude in check. I can't go to God until I'm all cleaned up and I've got
Hmm.
it together, which is, of course, a fallacy and is not true.
Yeah.
But I like that you articulated that the only way we develop intimacy is through communication and relationship. And if we're not bringing our full selves to the Lord, it's not about whether or not he knows our full selves. It's, are
Hmm.
we bringing them as really an act of surrender on our part to go,
Yeah.
I'm not trying to control the way I appear before you. I'm trusting you as a safe place to come authentically. So I'm
Yes.
glad you mentioned that, because I struggle with performance and people pleasing in every aspect of my life,
Yeah.
including spiritually, if I'm not really in tune with the spirit.
Yeah. I think oftentimes we can approach our relationship with God that way, um, really, no matter what the background was,
Hmm.
because we can think, oh, we need to ask him something a certain way. Um, our heart has to be a certain way. And it does talk about, like, Lord, forgiving me of all of my sins so
Yes.
that I can clear this line. Like, all of that is true, but there is nothing about you that you can hide from him.
Hmm.
And in fact, like, he created you and he loves every single inch of you. And he loves all of the things that make you you. And I think I had several experiences through probably like high school and college that made me realize in these moments that I did not love myself. He didn't leave me.
Mm-hmm.
He was still there. And I think that's what began to sow that, like, really, really firmly in my life, was that you can show up in every way because he's there and he loves you in every way. And truthfully, Shannon, I would have to say the biggest lesson in that came from um, when so in my husband's vows to me. I always had this belief that, like, when you marry the right person, this person is supposed to be as close as an earthly reflection of the Father's love for you.
Mm-hmm.
I always had that belief. That was always what I prayed for. That's always what I hoped for. And in my husband's vows to me, he said to me, you can show up every day, whatever version you are of yourself, and I
Wow.
will love you. I am there. And I didn't know that day, as a 26-year-old, how much I would need that
Mm-hmm.
every single day of our marriage. But it was such a perfect picture of what I have experienced with the Lord. It doesn't matter, Krystal, what version of you show up, and I love you.
Yeah.
And unlike my husband, who might be surprised sometimes at the version that I show up as, God is not surprised. He's not surprised by that. And so I think that helps set the foundation for what we were just talking about, is understanding that about the Lord.
You said in seasons when I haven't loved myself, he has
Hmm.
never left me. Talk a little bit about what you mean when you say in seasons I haven't loved myself, because
Yeah.
I do think, part of why I am tempted to approach God in a performance mentality is because I have learned
Yeah.
over my life that performance is rewarded.
Yes.
What I can do and accomplish is what people love. Who I am sometimes has not been what they've loved. And so if I just take that and overlay it on my relationship with God, then I would assume he would respond the same way.
Yeah.
So when you said, in seasons I didn't love myself, what do you
Hmm.
mean?
So I had a few experiences, particularly one in college, in a relationship that I shouldn't have been in, but you're
Mm,
in that relationship for several years. And what started out as really, really good, you end up in a phase of, I don't recognize myself. I don't know who I've
mm,
become in this world. Um, this person is putting things on me, or he has created this version of myself. He pulls out this version of myself that I don't recognize.
mm,
And so I remember going through this season of identity crisis, and seeing what I felt like was the worst of me And I would respond to certain things, or I would think certain things, especially when I got really, that was a season where I got really depressed. And I never was fully suicidal, but I definitely knew what it was to think so poorly of yourself and to question, what contribution do I have here and stuff. And this was all from a relationship that had just beat me down mentally and emotionally. And I remember there being a day where I'm kind of going through all of this, like picking through in my mind all of these things I don't like about myself. And I think as women, it is so easy for us to look in the mirror and immediately see all the things we don't like. And how often I can even recount those things, like, oh, I don't like this about me today, but like, whatever. Thankfully, I'm married to someone who tries to stop that in its tracks a lot. He's like, we need to stop this. We need to change that narrative and all this stuff, because what I see is not what he sees. And quite often that is the case with everyone.
Yes.
What you are seeing, what you are feeling, the things that are so true to you in your mind are usually not true to anyone else that looks at you. Usually they do not see you that way. And so I had to kind of go through a season of really learning that. And when I was feeling at my worst, when I would call out to God, he answered me. And he was there. And it was like, oh, well, you don't think the same thing that I am thinking about myself. And I will tell people a lot of times, I feel like I get asked a lot about like the voice of God. If I talk about hearing his voice, like what is his voice? And I have learned in my own experiences, I know his voice because I know what his voice is not. And when I was feeling depression and anxiety and all of these negative, terrible things that were continuing to pull me down and not towards him, that was not him. And so I experienced him as the complete opposite of those things. Everything of God was everything that was going to lift Krystal up and have her keep looking up and looking forward and not looking down. And so that's kind of one of the experiences that helped me really learn that.
Yeah, that's so good. And for those of you listening and watching, take that to heart. If you are unsure what the voice of God is, you can be very sure what it's not, which is, it is not condemnation. It is not shame. It is not something leading toward feelings of depression or anxiety. That is not your Father's voice.
Absolutely.
That's such helpful insight. Thank you for sharing that. You talk about that the struggles we face during waiting are not just obstacles, which I think some of us think, oh, well, this is an obstacle, but they're avenues for personal and spiritual growth. And so you said waiting teaches us to hope beyond the immediate. What does that mean?
Yeah. So I think the easiest thing for us when we're going through a waiting season is just looking at what's right now. And when we do that, when we're in a season where things are not what we want them to be, or they're not where we want them to be yet, then we just start looking for the end of this. I don't care what's happening right now. I don't care what God's doing right now. I just want the end to happen. And I think sometimes we're looking to just get rid of this. This is the obstacle. Let's get away from it. Whatever. We don't think it's giving anything to us. We don't think it's doing anything productive. But I have realized in switching my perspective about it is, instead of me looking for the end, if I can look for God in the midst of it, like where is he? And I'm just going to keep following that. Then that helps me stop looking at it like these obstacles that are these hurdles that I'm just trying to jump. How many do I have to jump? How many? Because that's not productive. What is productive is knowing that he's here with me and he's leading me somewhere. And that's how I need to be looking at this.
When I teach on seasons with women, I'm always cognizant of saying, if we spend all our time for instance, in a winter season that feels like withdrawal and closure and death, if we spend all our time looking for how we get to spring, then we often miss the gift that there can be in a season that seems uncomfortable or not fruitful or productive in any way. But because nothing is wasted in God's economy, like we said, there can be a gift in any season. In any
Yeah.
season of waiting, there are gifts to be found. And so much of them are his presence.
Yeah.
And so looking for him in a season of waiting helps us be present in it, not always waiting for the end of it. So,
Yeah.
so good. The last thing that I wrote down was not so much a quote, but more a concept that you talk about, which I thought was so good. You underscore the importance of trusting in God's timing, which I know we kind of, like you said, giving a thumbs up to Christianese about faith. I think we talk about God's timing a lot, but I'm not sure if
Yes.
we really internalize what that means. But you said that even if his timing doesn't align with our own, his plans are ultimately for our good and his glory, which is the thing that I trumpet at all times. So how can that perspective offer comfort to people who are grappling with impatience in a waiting season or even uncertainty about the future? Sometimes it's not just, let me get to the next thing because I know what the next thing is. Sometimes it's, I'm in a waiting season and I have no idea how the future is even going to turn out. How can understanding God's timing, his glory, and our good offer comfort in those seasons?
I think to kind of underscore a bit of what we've talked about, in that his timing is so protective of us.
Mm.
And I've had to see that through some really hard things. And like, if we go back to the example of our adoptions, had any of those adoptions happened, we would not have our firstborn son that we have. So we never would have adopted him. And I can see God's hand through his whole story, because even just his story is, he had a lot of medical needs. He has a brain tumor. Like, currently that's something that we're going through, another
Wow.
waiting season where you don't know where the end is. And so, but had he not made it to Nashville, of all places, where the doctor that he needed in this whole world was here, like, only God can orchestrate things
Yeah.
like that. And had any of my prayers been answered, then Aiden, my son, would not have made it to my home. And I would not have been able to be the vehicle to his healing, to the family that he needed, all of those things. And in my life, while that's a big story, it is a very small example of how many times God has done that, where you don't always know what he's protecting you from, because it can still feel like he took something. There are times, if I'm being honest, it will always feel like those girls, they were all girls that we lost. It can feel like those girls were taken from me.
That's such a good point.
And I still wrestle with that. I go through that. I'm like, God, how do I reconcile this with who I know you to be? And that is so hard for me. It just shakes the foundation of the faith that you have. And so there are still times that will creep up on me. It feels like this was taken from me. But look what God gave. And he gave that through this long season, because he was doing other things. It was going to take time. And, like, Aiden would not have been ready for us to come get him any moment sooner than when we did. And his, with his brain tumor and the development of that and all that stuff, it was all perfectly timed. And I often will talk about our son's life, in that he will have his own story to tell of what the Lord did for him. But what I see in his life is how specifically the Lord cares for us. Like, he cares down to the second.
That's so good.
And if you can trace his hand, if you can wait long enough to see what it is that he's doing through all of these times, you will see that thread is all perfectly timed at every single moment in your life. Always. Always. Like, even if you cannot see that right now, I promise you that when you get to where you're going, you will understand perfectly why he timed it the way that he did. He does not have an oops. Like, he doesn't just go, oh man, I missed that. I did not time that perfectly and she fell off a cliff. Like, that is not how he works. He knows exactly what's coming. He knows what is behind you. Recently, I was teaching on this subject, and I was talking about football and how we in the stands, we can be looking at a quarterback and be like, why did he throw the ball there? Did he not see that this guy was open all the way over here. Well,
Totally.
we have this perspective, right? He is on the field and he has all of these people in front of him. And that is the life we live. We are on the field. There's a lot of things in front of us and we don't really know which way to go. But God's perspective, he can always see the play develop long before it happens. Always. And so I want to trust his vantage point over mine. And
That's good.
that is something that we have to hold on to. We have to hold on to that hope. We have to hold on to that perspective in order to have the hope.
So good. I'm, all of life is not a waiting season, obviously.
Right.
So what advice do you have for people when a waiting season does reach a conclusion? Like, how do we ensure that what was learned or what was fought for and won in the waiting season kind of stays with us and informs how we enter perhaps a season where it's like, okay, we're no longer waiting anymore. Now it's go time. What does it look like when we're not in a waiting season to ensure that we carry that forward?
I think there's two ways to look at it. One is not ever forgetting what God did there. If we look back at all of these stories of our ancestors, I'm sure that Noah did not forget what it was like to be in that boat. And I am sure that the history and the legacy that is left with his family all comes from what God did there and the preservation that he had there and Noah's obedience during that time. And so oftentimes we need to think about our situations as this is a part of the legacy that we leave for all the people coming behind us, not just your family, but anybody watching your story.
Mm-hmm.
There's a legacy that you are leaving by how well you can wait and how well you navigated that season. And so that's one way to look at it. I think another way to look at this is being able to have a perspective that you can see this in someone else. So in my circumstance with adoption, when we use that example, I then could see someone else and I could understand what they were going through.
Yeah.
I understood what it was like to wait during that season. And so if you go through a particular season of waiting and you come out on the other side of that and you've navigated that, you have the dust from it, all of the things, you recognize it in someone else. And so now you know how to show up for them. You know how to advocate for them. You know how to be there for them and love them during that time. And so I think those are two perspectives coming out of something that are really good to have.
Yeah. I love the double meaning in the title of your book of that is a phrase you can use when other people are saying, hey, what can we do for you during this time? Well, you can love me in the waiting.
Yeah.
But then also it's what our Heavenly Father offers to us when we're waiting. My daughter, my child, you can love me in the waiting.
Yes.
And develop a close and intimate relationship with me and understand more about how I work and how I operate and my character. You can dig deep into scripture. You can see the ways that I worked in the lives of my children all the way back to the beginning. And you can make note of the fact that I don't change and shift like shadows.
Yep.
I remain the same and my character can be trusted. So I love that. I'm going to put this information in the show notes, but I'm going to tell you guys again, the title of Krystal's book is Love Me in the Waiting. Trusting God's purpose when you're longing for what's next. And so if you're like me, I can imagine that you either have just come out of a season of waiting, are sitting smack dab in it, or are seeing one coming on the horizon. And so I really encourage you to get Krystal's book because I think it will serve you and will be, as we say often, a word in season for you. Yeah. Krystal, I just want to thank you for stewarding this message so well. The thing I'm loving about this podcast is getting to have people share about what God has put in them, because it is such a communal benefit for us as believers to hear the journeys and the faith stories of other people. So thank you for sharing it with us. I'm so thankful.
Of course. Thank you for having a conversation with me about it.
Of course. I knew I wanted to as soon as I picked up the book. So thank you
Mhm.
for doing this. Now, I do have to ask you the question that I ask all
Yeah.
my guests as the last question on the podcast, which, you know, this podcast is called Everything Made Beautiful because we believe that God is consistently and constantly in the process of redeeming all things. So even the things that for us are difficult and gross and we'd never choose, God is even able to make those beautiful. And that's a specific talent only He possesses.
Mhm.
And so we just ask, as on kind of a light note, if you could design, architect your perfect, beautiful day, what would it look like from start to finish? And there's no caveats and there's no restrictions.
Mhm.
There's no allergies. There's no nothing in the perfect, beautiful day. So what would that look like if you could design it?
I think it would begin with waking up from a full night's sleep where no
Hmm.
child needed me in the middle of the evening. Because of my five kids, the youngest three are 6 months, 3 and 5. And
Bless you.
often one of them, you know, will have something nightmare, have to pee, something,
Hmm.
you know, in the middle
Something.
of the night. So I would love to wake up from not having that. And honestly, just being able to spend the day with my boys uninterrupted
Mm.
and my husband, like having quality time with him, quality time with the boys, and reading because I love to read. And I feel like as an author, I don't get to read as much as I want because I'm writing
Right.
more than I'm reading. So I would love to be able to read and go on a walk, just like a peaceful walk around my neighborhood, and then have dinner with my whole family around the
Hmm.
table and no one fight with each other. Like that would
Yes.
just be,
Yeah, you've
yeah,
five, well, really six boys in your home.
yes.
There's bound to be some sort of tussle at some point.
Yeah, it's quite, I don't have the drama that maybe you would have with all the girls
Hmm.
around, but it is kind of like, let's fight this out and let's be
Yeah.
as physical as we can. And I'm stronger than you. And, you know, all of those things. I'm greatly outnumbered. So,
Yeah. That's kind of cool though. I was thinking, man, that must be, I mean, you are, I mean, you're the queen at that point.
yes,
So
it's true.
everything,
Nope. My husband does say that. He's like, you get to forever be the queen.
yeah.
And he's raising my boys to believe the same about me, which I love. And they always say a little
Mm,
boy loves his mama. So I'm
absolutely.
happy to have five of those.
Yes, if someone has to do it, it should be
Mhm.
you, right?
Right. If
Yes.
someone has to, I guess I'll do it.
Well, Krystal, thank you, thank you, thank you so much. I'm excited for people to connect with you and to follow you and to learn more from what you have to share. And I will tag everything for people, but family, I just want you to know Krystal has offered us a discount code for
Mhm.
her book. So if you use the code EMB, as in Everything Made Beautiful, on the link that I will put in the show notes, you'll be able to get her book at a discount. But I'll tell you what, it is worth full price. So go get it,
Sweet.
read it, and be blessed by it. So, Krystal, thank you. And to everybody listening and watching, I want to remind you, be looking for the ways that God is making everything beautiful in your life, including you. And we will see you next time.
Thanks for joining us for Everything Made Beautiful. We are so grateful for your willingness to tune in. Be sure to follow, rate, and download the podcast and check out the show notes for additional links and resources from today's episode. You can follow Everything Made Beautiful podcast on Instagram and Facebook and can subscribe to Shannon's writing on Substack. This information and more is available at shannonsuzannescott.com. See you next time.